When you read Plato's Republic, do you notice that Socrates contradicts himself about justice within the first 2 books? When Aristotle discusses the best regime in his Politics, do you see how he systematically undermines his own apparent conclusions? These are not accidents or oversights, they are deliberate signals. After decades of teaching at the University of Chicago, I have discovered that the greatest philosophical arguments are built like ancient temples. Their most sacred chambers lie hidden beneath the visible structure. Today, we shall learn to read the secret architecture that protects the most dangerous truths of political philosophy. The masters wrote in layers, using contradictions as keys to unlock meanings that could never be spoken directly. What appears to be confusion on the surface reveals itself as the most sophisticated form of philosophical communication ever devised. This is the art that separates genuine students from mere readers, and understanding it transforms everything we thought we knew about the foundation of political thought. Chapter 1: The Necessity of Hidden Meaning in Classical Texts. Why would the greatest minds in human history deliberately obscure their most important insights? Because philosophy has always lived under threat, and serious thinkers understood that dangerous truths require diplomatic expression. When Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth and impiety, every subsequent philosopher learned a crucial lesson: the relationship between philosophy and the city is necessarily tense. Philosophy questions everything, while political society depends on unexamined beliefs and shared assumptions about justice, virtue, and the gods. This tension creates what I call the theological-political problem. How can philosophers pursue truth while avoiding persecution? The answer lies in esoteric writing, a sophisticated art that allows great thinkers to communicate on multiple levels simultaneously. The surface teaching satisfies casual readers and potential persecutors with conventional wisdom and acceptable conclusions, while hidden meanings await those capable of careful analysis and patient investigation. Consider how Maimonides structured the Guide of the Perplexed. He explicitly warns readers that the book contains contradictions, and these contradictions are intentional guides to deeper understanding. He states that he has scattered the deeper meanings throughout the text like pieces of gold hidden in a mine, requiring serious students to dig patiently for the treasures. This method serves 2 essential purposes. It protects dangerous truths from those who would misuse them politically or religiously, and it ensures that only serious students, those willing to wrestle with textual difficulties and apparent inconsistencies, discover the most profound insights about human nature and political life. The apparent confusion that frustrates superficial readers becomes a filter that separates genuine philosophers from mere opinion holders. Every contradiction is a door, every inconsistency a pathway to hidden chambers of meaning. The art of reading philosophically thus requires what I call charitable interpretation, the assumption that great thinkers knew exactly what they were doing when they appeared to make mistakes or contradict themselves. Chapter 2: Reading Between Contradictions, the Platonic Method. Let me teach you to see what others miss when they encounter the deliberate contradictions that mark serious philosophical writing. When Plato's Socrates argues in the Meno that learning is impossible because we cannot seek what we do not know, and then immediately demonstrates learning through the famous slave boy experiment, he is not confused about basic epistemology. He is revealing the inadequacy of conventional assumptions about knowledge and forcing us to discover a third possibility that transcends both initial positions. This technique appears throughout the Platonic corpus with mathematical precision. In the Republic, Socrates first accepts Thrasymachus' challenge to defend justice by showing that it pays, then systematically demonstrates that justice requires sacrificing conventional goods for higher purposes. The surface contradiction forces careful readers to distinguish between different types of advantage and different conceptions of human happiness. Most readers miss this deeper teaching because they focus on following the dramatic narrative rather than attending to the logical structure beneath it. Aristotle employs this method constantly, though his style disguises it more effectively than Plato's dramatic presentations. In the Nicomachean Ethics, He appears to give contradictory accounts of happiness, first identifying it with virtuous activity, then with contemplative philosophy. Ordinary readers see confusion. Careful students recognize that Aristotle is revealing the complex relationship between practical and theoretical wisdom, showing that human flourishing involves tensions that cannot be resolved through simple formulas. This method requires what I call hermeneutical charity, the disciplined assumption that great thinkers possess superior insight rather than inferior logical training. When we encounter apparent inconsistencies in classical texts, our first instinct should not be to correct the author but to discover what the contradiction teaches us about the complexity of the phenomena under investigation. Most modern scholars, lacking this charitable approach, mistake sophisticated communication for primitive thinking. They impose contemporary standards of clarity and consistency on texts that deliberately violate these standards to achieve higher pedagogical purposes, missing the deeper architecture entirely. Chapter 3: The Surface and the Depth, Two Levels of Reading. Consider carefully your own reading habits and intellectual assumptions. How often do you notice when an author contradicts something stated pages or chapters earlier? How frequently do you ask why certain examples seem oddly chosen or irrelevant to the apparent argument? How much attention do you pay to the dramatic setting of philosophical dialogues or the order in which topics are introduced? Most readers, even highly intelligent and well-educated ones, focus primarily on following the surface narrative and extracting explicit doctrines, missing the deeper architectural principles that govern the text's construction. But philosophical reading requires a fundamentally different approach that treats texts as complex artifacts designed to guide readers toward discoveries they must make for themselves. We must attend carefully to what the author emphasizes and what he passes over quickly, when arguments receive unequal development, when crucial terms shift meaning without explicit explanation, when examples seem carefully chosen to create specific impressions. These apparent flaws in composition are actually keys to hidden meanings that reward patient investigation. The distinction between surface and depth corresponds precisely to the difference between accepting conventional opinions and achieving genuine knowledge through independent inquiry. Most people live contentedly with received wisdom about justice, virtue, and political obligation, but philosophers must question even the most fundamental assumptions that govern social life. However, this systematic questioning threatens social stability. Imagine if everyone seriously doubted the justice of existing laws, the truth of accepted moral beliefs, or the legitimacy of established political authority. Esoteric writing resolves this permanent tension by allowing philosophers to pursue radical inquiry while presenting a respectable public face that satisfies ordinary citizens and political authorities. The surface teaching reinforces conventional morality and traditional beliefs, making the text appear safe and even beneficial to social order. The hidden teaching reveals the problematic character of these same beliefs to those capable of handling dangerous truths responsibly and using them for philosophical rather than destructive purposes. This is not deception but prudent communication, a mature recognition that different types of souls require different types of guidance and that wisdom involves knowing when and how to communicate various levels of truth. Chapter 4: Ancient Wisdom versus Modern Confusion, The Great Mistake. Modern philosophy abandoned the art of esoteric writing with catastrophic consequences that we are still experiencing today. When Machiavelli decided to speak openly about political manipulation and the necessity of violence, when Hobbes explicitly described the state of nature as a war of all against all, when Rousseau publicly proclaimed that man is naturally good but corrupted by society, these revolutionary thinkers believed that truth should be accessible to everyone regardless of their capacity to handle it wisely. They rejected the ancient prudence that recognized the need for different levels of teaching appropriate to different types of readers. The result has been philosophical chaos masquerading as intellectual progress. Philosophical ideas, torn from their protective context and hermeneutical safeguards, became political ideologies that promised to remake society according to theoretical blueprints. Complex insights about human nature were simplified into slogans suitable for mass movements. The careful balance between theoretical understanding and practical wisdom collapsed into dogmatic systems that encouraged political experimentation without regard for unintended consequences or human costs. Ancient philosophers understood that theoretical truth and political life exist in permanent tension that cannot be resolved through systematic reform or revolutionary change. Plato's Republic describes an ideal city that Socrates explicitly admits is impossible to realize in practice. The point is not to provide a practical blueprint for political reform but to clarify the relationship between justice and political possibility, showing why perfect justice requires conditions that human nature makes impossible to achieve or maintain. Similarly, Aristotle's Politics examines various constitutional arrangements not to advocate revolutionary change but to help prudent citizens and statesmen navigate existing imperfections with realistic expectations about what politics can and cannot accomplish. His analysis of democracy reveals both its advantages and its inherent tendency toward demagogy, preparing thoughtful readers to participate wisely in democratic life while understanding its limitations. Modern political philosophy, lacking this prudential dimension, oscillates helplessly between naive optimism and cynical realism. Progressive thinkers believe reason can perfect society through institutional reform. Conservative reactionaries despair of any meaningful improvement and retreat into nostalgia. Both positions miss the ancient insight that politics involves permanent problems requiring ongoing practical wisdom rather than final theoretical solutions that can be implemented once and for all. Chapter 5: The Theological-Political Problem, Faith and Reason. Now examine honestly your own relationship between reason and faith, between philosophical inquiry and religious belief. Can these two approaches to ultimate questions coexist peacefully, or must one ultimately prevail over the other through intellectual conquest? This question has divided the greatest minds for centuries, yet the most sophisticated medieval philosophers, men like Maimonides, Averroes, and Aquinas, found ways to honor both without betraying either through shallow compromise. Their solution involved developing sophisticated forms of expression that protected philosophy from religious persecution while preserving genuine faith from corrosive doubt. Medieval Islamic and Jewish philosophers perfected esoteric writing precisely because they lived under religious authority that viewed independent philosophical inquiry with justified suspicion. Reason, when pursued without limits, tends to undermine the moral and theological beliefs that hold religious communities together. Yet these same religious authorities needed philosophical expertise to defend faith against sophisticated opponents and to develop rational theology. This created a delicate situation requiring diplomatic solutions. Philosophers had to demonstrate the harmony between reason and revelation while secretly pursuing inquiries that might undermine conventional religious beliefs. Maimonides provides the perfect example of this sophisticated approach in the Guide of the Perplexed. On the surface, he appears to support traditional Jewish theology and demonstrate the compatibility between Aristotelian philosophy and biblical revelation. But careful readers discover that he systematically undermines anthropomorphic conceptions of God while showing the inadequacy of conventional theology to serious philosophical investigation. His surface teaching satisfies religious readers who want rational support for their beliefs. His hidden teaching reveals the problematic character of literal biblical interpretation to those capable of philosophical analysis. This approach protects both philosophy and religion by preventing destructive conflict between them. Faith remains intact for those whose nature requires it for moral guidance and psychological stability, while reason maintains its autonomy for those capable of philosophical life. The alternative, open conflict between reason and revelation, destroys both. Religion becomes mere superstition vulnerable to rational criticism, and philosophy becomes destructive skepticism that undermines the moral foundations of political life. The theological-political problem requires diplomatic solutions that honor the legitimate claims of both theoretical understanding and practical belief. recognizing that human societies need both philosophical insight and religious guidance to flourish over time. Chapter 6: The Ethics of Philosophical Communication, Truth and Responsibility. Should philosophers tell the whole truth to everyone, regardless of the consequences? This question goes to the heart of philosophical responsibility and reveals the complexity of the relationship between wisdom and society. Socrates claimed to know only that he knew nothing, yet he clearly possessed deep insights about justice, virtue, and the human soul that enabled him to expose the ignorance of supposed experts. Was he lying about his own ignorance? Or was he practicing a form of prudent communication that protected both himself and his interlocutors from dangerous knowledge they were not equipped to handle wisely? The answer reveals the sophisticated ethical dimension of philosophical teaching. Truth is indeed the highest good for philosophers, but not everyone is intellectually or morally equipped to handle all truths responsibly. Some insights, if widely accepted without proper preparation, would undermine the moral beliefs that hold society together and make political life possible. Others might encourage individuals to abandon necessary illusions that make ordinary life bearable and meaningful. Still others could justify tyranny by revealing the conventional character of moral and political authority, providing clever manipulators with weapons against legitimate governance. Consider the practical implications if everyone truly understood that justice is largely conventional rather than natural, that moral beliefs often reflect power relations rather than eternal truths, that human nature contains darker possibilities than conventional morality acknowledges. Such knowledge, in the wrong hands or poorly understood, becomes destructive nihilism that undermines social cooperation. But the same insights, properly grasped by serious students through careful study and moral development, become sources of practical wisdom and theoretical understanding that enhance rather than destroy human flourishing. This is why great philosophers wrote esoterically rather than broadcasting dangerous truths indiscriminately. They recognized fundamental differences in human intellectual and moral capacity and adjusted their communication accordingly. The surface teaching provides guidance appropriate for ordinary citizens who need moral direction and political stability. The hidden teaching offers insights suitable for potential philosophers who can use dangerous knowledge responsibly. This is not elitism but realism, a mature acknowledgement that intellectual and moral capacities vary significantly, and that responsible teachers must consider their students' ability to benefit from different types of knowledge. The art of writing philosophically involves carefully calibrating dangerous truths to receptive audiences while protecting society from premature or destructive revelations that could undermine the conditions necessary for both philosophical inquiry and decent political life. Chapter 7: The Return to Great Books, Rediscovering Hidden Treasures. I invite you to rediscover the inexhaustible treasures hidden in our philosophical tradition, waiting patiently for readers equipped with the proper hermeneutical tools. The great books of Western civilization contain more wisdom than we have begun to extract, but only if we learn to read them with the care, patience, and intellectual humility they deserve. This means abandoning the characteristically modern prejudice that newer is automatically better and returning to classical texts with the assumption that we have far more to learn than to correct. Begin with Plato, but read slowly and attentively, resisting the contemporary demand for quick results and immediate practical application. Notice when Socrates changes the subject unexpectedly, when he uses myths instead of rigorous arguments, when he appears to contradict positions he defended earlier. These are not flaws in reasoning but sophisticated teaching devices designed to guide serious readers toward insights that cannot be communicated through direct assertion. The Republic is not simply a blueprint for an ideal state but a complex examination of justice that reveals its deepest teachings through careful attention to dramatic structure, character development, and philosophical progression. Continue with Aristotle, but resist the scholarly temptation to systematize his insights prematurely or reconcile apparent contradictions through forced interpretations. His seeming inconsistencies often reflect the genuine complexity of the phenomena he investigates rather than confusion on his part. The Politics contains multiple perspectives on the best regime precisely because political life itself involves irreducible tensions between competing goods like freedom and order, equality and excellence, stability and justice. Extend your reading to the great medieval philosophers who preserved and developed classical insights under radically different historical conditions. Study carefully how thinkers like Maimonides, Averroes, and Aquinas adapted ancient wisdom to new challenges while maintaining its essential character and protective function. Their sophisticated hermeneutical techniques, developed under pressure from religious authority, can teach us to read all philosophical texts more carefully and charitably. This return to primary sources requires intellectual virtues that our age tends to discourage: patience with difficult arguments, humility before superior minds, and intellectual courage to question our own assumptions. It means accepting that our predecessors might have understood fundamental questions better than we do, that wisdom accumulates through tradition rather than progressing automatically through innovation. But it also promises the most rewarding form of education possible: direct encounter with the greatest minds of our civilization, guided by the interpretive arts they developed for communicating the deepest truths about political life and human nature to those capable of receiving them. Conclusion. The secret structure of philosophical arguments reflects the permanent tension between wisdom and society that defines the human condition. Great thinkers wrote esoterically not from intellectual cowardice but from mature prudence. They understood that dangerous truths require careful handling and that different souls need different types of guidance to flourish. Learning to read this hidden architecture transforms us from passive consumers of received opinions into active participants in the living philosophical tradition. The contradictions that frustrate casual readers become doorways to deeper understanding. The apparent confusions that modern scholarship seeks to correct reveal themselves as sophisticated teaching devices designed to protect both truth and society. Return to the great books with this hermeneutical key, and discover how much wisdom has been waiting patiently for careful readers willing to undertake the demanding but supremely rewarding journey of genuine philosophical education. The ancient art of reading philosophically remains as necessary today as ever, perhaps more so in an age that has forgotten the crucial difference between information and wisdom, between cleverness and prudence, between knowledge and understanding.